I am Dr. Robin Boylorn. My research interests are grounded in the lived experiences of Black women and Black families in the American U.S. South. The language of lived experience is some terminology that I have used in some recent work, the language and languish of lived experience, to kind of reflect some of the challenges of being able to represent what we go through with words, and how one of my goals as an autoethnographer is to figure out how to do that. And so in the talk, it will be me introducing some language language and terminology that I've used, that I've theorized and introduced as a way of helping temper these stories, and to create space for them. So it'll be part a talk about theorizing language, part a talk about storytelling and me sharing some stories about experiences and difficult experiences. How do we reflect and represent experiences that we don't have we don't really have a model for. And so for me, one of the goals of my work is to tell stories that give people permission to tell theirs. And sometimes that means telling stories that are challenging or that are hard, but doing that anyway, with the goal of always telling ethical stories as honestly as possible. And I am I try to have a tenor of hopefulness, of hope and hopefulness, and how we can, if we can imagine a better world and better circumstances, then we can achieve it. So critical autoethnography is a qualitative methodology that kind of engages personal lived experiences and personal narrative with kind of couples that with cultural critique and reflexive sense making. So essentially it's a way to situate cultural experiences through the lens of lived experience, and to do that through theoretical engagement and through analysis, so that we are not just telling a story, but understanding the context of that story and making sense of it, so that we can use stories as theories, but also stories as arguments that can inform how we live our lives and how we can co-create the world we want to see, right? And so I think that stories help us do that. And ethnography is at the impetus of autoethnography, so it's really just another way of studying culture, but studying the self through culture, through storied experiences. So above all, I'm a storyteller. And I'm also very, very invested in creating research that is accessible both within and without the academy. A lot of my early research was focused on rural Black women. My dissertation, for example, focused on women from my home community. And it was really important to me that if I'm writing about them, that they be able to read the research and recognize themselves and not be confounded by the way that it was presented. I also think that it's important that we don't just reiterate things to each other as academicians, because that really doesn't have the impact that we want it to have. It allows us to feel, to potentially feel important, and perhaps cited. But for me, it's not so much the internal citations of the academy, but the external recognition and acknowledgments outside of the academy that are important. And critical autoethnography gave me a way of doing that. And for me, the critical part of autoethnography is one of the ways, because sometimes people get confused about autoethnographic method. When it's done well, it is indistinguishable from just a well-written story. When done well, the theory can be disguised. The critique is so embedded in in the moral of the story that you really don't realize that it's there. But I feel like it's very important that we understand the recipe of autoethnography, and criticality is a big part of that. Like, we have to be able to critique the context that we are having these experiences in, because oftentimes when you're telling a story, when telling stories, we can people tend to blame a character, and often the culprit of a story are the circumstances that frame the experiences of that character. So sometimes they make bad choices, but what are their options? And so I think autoethnography gives us an opportunity to consider what is the context of our lives, and how does that inform what choices are available. And it also helps to create a space for amplifying marginalized identities and experiences that are otherwise left out of the public landscape. Yes, so Ratchet Respectability was born from research I was doing on representations of Black women in reality television. And one of the ways that I was deconstructing these representations was that you would have these shows like The Real Housewives of Atlanta in particular, and then you would have these Black women who, and thinking about what is the landscape of that. Black women are generally, through a racialized lens, perceived as unsophisticated, uncouth, and a lot of that is often tied to their class condition, or their presumed class condition. And it oftentimes can be cause for a separation or hierarchy of Black womanhood. And so Ratchet Respectability is like it is an embrace of all iterations of Black womanhood, a rejection that there is a hierarchy based on class, by looking at these characters, and I guess they're not characters, it's not a scripted show, but looking at these women and how they are being represented, how they're being edited and produced on these shows as both authentically Black and authentically upper class, or theoretically upper class. And so ratchetness is this characterization of lower class Black women and how they conduct themselves. And respectability is a term that we know historically Black people have adopted. This like during civil rights, one of the ways they tended to think they would get equality, equal treatment, and respect from white people is if they were respectable, if they were not, if they rejected and resisted all of the things that white people thought about them. And so putting ratchetness with respectability is kind of oxymoronic, but it is an invitation to be both at once, and to insist that Black women are performing, and sometimes in an exaggerated form in these shows, they're performing this ratchetness to prove that they are actually Black women, while they're also performing upper classness, which is something that they're not expected to do. So what do we do when those two things clash? So that's what ratchet respectability speaks to. And Black girlism is actually something I'm going to be talking about and speaking to in the talk later today. But Black girlism is this idea about identity and identity politics that speaks to the indivisibility of race and gender for Black women in particular. They are never just Black or just girl. They are Black girls at once. So Black girlism is this idea of there being no pause, no space, no distinction between race and gender for Black women and Black girls. So Black girl, one word, as one word, and as one way of kind of collapsing these shared experiences and oppressions, but also acknowledging that they can't be separated. And my argument would be even on paper, even in the way we say it. And Black girlism is essentially an expansion of Black feminism. It's kind of taking things that we already know and that Black feminists have always told us, and just kind of contemporizing it. Very when I was a student, when I was an undergraduate student, that communication theory class was the one if I could have gotten out of taking it, I would have. It was so intimidating. And I think, so one of the things that I have learned in time is that theories are usually reflections of things that we see and notice, like you said, phenomenon. But oftentimes, one of the reasons I realized that I was being confounded by it is because I wasn't being reflected in it. The theories that I was forced to memorize and know and find examples for weren't reflective of my own experiences, and so they didn't always make sense to me. When I realized that all of us are, in one way or another, naive theorists, because we're all trying to make sense of things. When I understood it in those more simplistic terms, it became a little bit less intimidating, and I realized that when I am figuring something out and analyzing it, and even in those times when I'm trying to take an existing theory and make it make sense for someone who looks like me, is from places that I'm from and thinks the way I do, that too is theorizing. So I can theorize these cultural conceptions of my experience and offer something for other people, other Black women and girls in particular, to be able to explain. So if they're intimidated by the idea or conceptualization of theorizing, but if they're that is because they don't see themselves. But if they are introduced to theories that have them in mind, that center them, then it invites them to theorize as well. So I think the main thing is that it's not as fancy, as it sounds. It's really just the process of digging deep to understand something and then giving it a framework so that other people can talk about it similarly. And so I want my goal is to help create a lexicon of theories that are inherent to the Black experience. And it doesn't mean that they're off limits to other scholars in the same way that non-Black theories are not off limits to me, but it means that there would be a contortion to make it fit, which I think is a good practice. When people have to contort themselves to understand something, they understand what it's like to be othered and to have to contort yourself to understand it. Right. So my goal is to make things, is to create theories and to offer opportunities of looking at things that people of color and people from particular backgrounds will immediately recognize, and other people will be forced to learn. Mm-hmm. I think, my advice to scholars always is to read more, right? To engage in theory, because you can't theorize without knowing what already exists. I can't tell you how many times a student will introduce something to me as if they've invented it, and I'm like, oh, that's such and such and such, right? Go read this, right? So I think that theorizing, because even with me, like I said, Black girlism, this Black girl one word theorization did not happen in a vacuum. It is a literal expansion of existing research on identity politics and intersectionality that Black women had always talked about. They just did not name it in that way. So sometimes it's not even so much that you have to come up with something that no one has ever come up with. It's you helping to put it in words that will make it easy to understand, easy to remember, and can help contain it in a way that it is citable for someone else. So I think my advice would be, if you have an interest in something, read everything that you can find about that thing. First of all, so that you don't plagiarize someone else's existing theory, but also so that you can ground your theory on things that are already known. So the Crunk Feminist Collective is a collection of scholar activists. We are actually celebrating 15 years this year in 2025, which is pretty amazing. I think that we are the longest lasting feminist collective in the country, which is really exciting. And we came together initially with the intention of translating some of the things that we were doing within the academy as feminists, translating those things outside of the academy to people who otherwise wouldn't understand it, right? So it's almost like if I am teaching feminist theories and feminist principles in a classroom, what of people who will never step foot in my classroom? So how do we take it outside of the classroom? At the time, in 2010, that mechanism was a blog. And so we had a very successful blog, much more successful than we expected. I know that I expected. I never really imagined that as many people as kind of engaged it would. But because at first we actually were writing the blogs kind of like to each other. It was public, but it's like the things that we were in conversation about and that we were trying to make sense of. And knowing that people would be able to peek in, but not necessarily thinking that they would. But it gave us an opportunity to map what was happening in real time. It's really cool to go back to some of those earlier blogs to kind of think about the cultural moment that happened. Some of this was like, I think we were in that cohort of original hot takes, but we were able to respond in real time. So it was very journalistic in practice. And none of us were journalists, so that was a little bit intimidating. We would have, and it was a way of kind of sharing experiences, but then doing it in community within the collective, but also in the larger community that we ended up building out. So it's been fantastic. We transitioned from the blog to some more individualistic work that we were doing because, we initiated the blog when those of us who are in the academy were tenure track, those who were working outside of the academy were, had more predictable schedules, but we have, grown up. So we kind of grew up in our feminisms, grew up with different responsibilities. Several of us are now leading centers, which is interesting. And so we're still doing the work, but in a different way. So we have found a way to kind of shape shift the medium from a blog to a book, and then several of the CFs have so we had the Crunk Feminist Collection, which was our first book, which was a compilation of some of our most read blogs over the first 5 years, and then we have Feminist AF, which is a YA book about feminism that my colleagues Brittany Cooper, Susanna Morris, and Chanel Kraft Tanner collectively wrote. And so there's been so we've had book projects, there have been symposia, but we're all kind of doing our own thing and taking the crunk feminism into those spaces. So what started out as a blog continues to evolve, but the goals are consistent, and it's just, making feminism fun and accessible, and doing so in community. So with Crunk Culture, it is as a commentary, I have about 3 minutes to outline a topic and offer a perspective. It's very opinion based. So I'm able to offer an informed perspective, but I try to take a complicated concept and make it digestible. But I also try to offer information, alternatives, and I challenge the listeners not necessarily to think the way I think, but just to think differently about something, given that when you're given more information. So like with Black maternal mortality, in that particular series, I just remember talking about pregnancy as a medical condition, kind of urging people to not romanticize something that kills women, Black women in particular, every day. So my goal with it is to kind of concretize and simplify complicated concepts and give people a takeaway that they will attach to that topic the next time they hear it. So they may not, there are indefinitely some stubborn listeners who are like, I don't think that, I don't believe that, whatever. And I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. I'm just trying to kind of inundate them with information. So and how can I do that in a very persuasive way in 3 minutes. Some of my Crunk Culture commentaries have been cited in academic work. There have been public references of it. So that's really important to me. That means it's doing what it's doing. Also, engagements. I always tell people do not go to the comment section, but but occasionally people also say positive things and negative things in the comment section. So, but just, there's usually just been an expression of appreciation of, sharing something that they didn't know. And that's the overall goal, that I am in giving information that you didn't previously have. I think that the work that I do within the Academy is very important because, like I said, one of the goals has always been to, when I was a young scholar, not being able to find myself in theories, not being able to find myself or representations of myself in published scholarship. I want to create that so that young women like me, as they're coming up, they're not searching for self. They're not questioning whether or not they belong or that they're in the right place. And so that is my commitment to the Academy. But my commitments outside of the Academy, I'm a first generation college student. Most of the people that I grew up with and who are connected to places that I call home are not reading journal articles, whether they're accessible or not, because some of them are behind, or behind paywalls. And so how do I get that information to them? So for me, the scholar activism is taking what I know and what I can write about in an academic scholarly context, but putting it into the public and writing it publicly so that the same conversations can happen. So the same conversation I'm having with students in my class, people I can have with my homegirls in the salon, or that people can have across the kitchen table because it's instigated by something that I introduced through one of those means. And I think having as many different ways of doing that, having different ways of doing that is important because, like, some people will read. That's when you want to write a blog. Some people will listen. That's when you want to have an audio commentary. Some people will watch, so that there are videos like this, but all of them are invitations for people wherever they are, kind of meeting them where they are and kind of bringing them into the fold and inviting them into the conversation. I think that we have to hold fast to our commitments in this moment, because it's more important now than it ever has been to be a truth teller and to record this moment in history. A lot of the work and I understand that a lot of the work that we've done and that we've been doing feels jeopardized in this moment and frankly dangerous. I think that we have to do it anyway, even though it's hard, even though it comes with challenges and risks, we have to do it anyway, because if we don't, then what are we left with? A Zora Neale Hurston quote that if you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. And I think that has to inform the moment, that we have to speak about what is happening and tell the truth about it, even if it costs us something. And I think that the true, the essence of allyship in doing the work, regardless of what it costs. And I fundamentally believe that if it doesn't cost you something, you're not doing it right. It has to cost you something. And you have to be willing to be empathic, but also to take empathy to that next level and put yourself in a position of vulnerability and the same vulnerability that those you are seeking to help are in. And what that looks like in this moment, I know I'm saying this from a privileged position, from a tenured position, right? Because in the Academy, young people, young scholars, I can't even imagine the uncertainty of the moment, the fear of telling the truth. But I have an advisory board, and we had a meeting recently, and one of the board members said she shared this truth from her 95-year-old grandmother, that it won't always be like this. And I think that kind of genius can only come from someone who has lived 9 decades. We are living through something in this moment that I haven't experienced in my lifetime, and I think that can be overwhelming in and of itself, but it won't always be this way. And so we just have to be tenacious and resilient and brave.
Hi, my name is Srivi Ramasubramanian. I'm the director of CodeShift, the Collaboratory for Data Equity, Social Healing, Inclusive Futures and Transformation. Thanks for watching Chai with Srivi.